April 10th, 1942, NBS KFL Denver, Friday, April 10th, 1942. Analysis of propaganda from Siegfried Wagner. Good evening. Even when these mountains all about me look their most brilliant and beautiful in the first warmth of spring, the news from the Far East hangs like a pale of smoke over the silvery budding aspen and dampens the happy chatter of the brooks. We have lost Bataan, and we may lose the fortress island of Corregidor. It is in times like these, as a people, we must not lose our sense of proportion. It is in hours of national grief that we must stand firmer than ever together against the common enemy and his propaganda. It is now that we must, with clear, unblinking eyes, look into the enemy's face when he tries to tell us that all is lost for us and we had better look for culprits right in our midst. Well, know the enemy propagandists that we are in vast majority a united people. Well, know the enemy propagandists that we are in vast majority a united people and that they have a small chance to make us distrust one another. They know it so well that for this past week they have concentrated most of their efforts on feeding anti-Semitic arguments to that small group of their American key agents, whom fairly complete list can be found in the current issue of Life magazine. These key agents and key organizations of Axis propaganda in this country I mentioned a couple of months ago. At last, the government is clamping down on them, and Life has done an excellent job of exposing them down to the names and even addresses. All of them, from Los Angeles to New York, work on the oldest, most superstitious form of race hatred, anti-Semitism, being against the Jews, both types of Jews. They consider anti-Semitism the easiest way to disrupt our national unity because when, in the past, ignorant, hate-ridden European people tried to find somebody to pass the buck for their self-inflicted misery, they invariably picked the helpless Semitic people, the Jews. Axis propagandists in Berlin and Rome, as well as in Wichita, Kansas, and Chicago, figured that the people who settled and built up America never became real Americans, meaning we are one. They charge us with carrying on the most loathsome inheritance of Europe and Asia. They will not have it true that whoever came to America came here to get rid of that Eurasian curse of race hatred and to start a new world free of the misery and superstitions of Europe's dark ages. The henchmen of Hitler and Mussolini here and abroad size us up as the same type of gutter snipes as the same type of superstitious, uncivilized gangsters as they are themselves. Just listen to what one of these gangsters, none other than the former American poet Ezra Pound, had to say last night. I quote, "I think Roosevelt belongs in an insane asylum. His writers are lunatics. You have come down far when a Jew by the name of Finkelstein helps running your country." Unquote. Pound was addressing the American listeners from that citadel of disloyalty and treachery, Mussolini's Rome. He called you, the American people, 120 million suckers. He charged the administration with embezzling the nation's funds and continued, "The American nation will never win a war or a peace as long as a man like Morgenthau sits in the national treasury. I do not want the United States to use Hawaii in the interest of the kike. The United States has been invaded by vermin, and this is Ezra Pound trying to tell you that you will be invaded because you have been invaded." Sad, huh? It's the theory of less thans. Get rid of the less thans, start with the Jews, and get rid of the less thans and everything will be better. It's not true. America is made up of less thans. And together we are one, and we are better than all. All races, all creeds, all colors. It's about your spirit. It's about what's inside of you, not about what you were born as, and not about what color you are. It's what kind of person you are. Are you an American or not? That was all me. So back to him. You want to know who the man is who uses such foul language against his own country? Look in your children's school books. In some of them you may still find some of his poems. At one time, some people in this country called him America's poet laureate. But all of his life he has been a crotchety, foul-mouthed egomaniac who thought of his own greatness in superlative terms. He never got along with anyone who had the temerity to consider Ezra Pound just another human being. He never knew the meaning of loyalty and even gave his own son the ridiculous name of Crescendo Effect, so it would be a reflective of the greatness of his father. He sold his American birthright to Hitler and his stooge Mussolini because they, to whom no decent American would ever dream of going, flattered Ezra Pound's bloated ego. Wacky in mind and body, dissipated by all the evils of self-indulgence, Pound saw that his own country ignored him because it correctly sensed that he was nothing but a windbag of thoroughly un-American vanity. He lives in decaying Palazzo near Genoa on the shore of the Mediterranean. He is paid and kept alive for the purpose of breaking down American morale, and by that other windbag who sold his people out to Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini. No doubt, Ezra Pound lives in style. No doubt he does not share the Italian people's pangs of hunger, nor does he share the Italian people's unacknowledged state of civil war. Ezra Pound, whose lightheartedly betrayed his own country and his own people, that Ezra Pound is today even a traitor to the very people whose hospitality and bribes he accepts. He tries to sell us, in this country, Mussolini's defunct fascism, while the Nazi is pressing the last ounce of strength, the last ounce of food and war materials out of the unfortunate Italian people, at the last 500,000 of whom belong to the underground movement which has blown up the submarine base in Poland and the subterranean oil tank in Sicily. Ezra Pound tries to talk Americans into his brand of lunatic anti-Semitism, which he presents as if it were shared by all Italians. But Italians never were anti-Semitic inclined. In fact, they had very few Hebrews among themselves. Most of them already had gotten kicked out a long time ago. And the few that they had were such excellent citizens that Mussolini battled with Hitler for many a moon over retaining his right-hand economic advisor. Hitler put on the thumbscrews, and finally Mussolini had to let the man go. But he couldn't run Italy without that Jewish member of his cabinet, and so what did Benito do? He declared the man an honorary Aryan and reinstated him with Hitler's consent. That is the sort of thing that Ezra Pound fights for by foaming at the mouth and by contorting logic, facts, and common sense out of all semblance. If he were to try to talk to the Italian people in the same fashion he talks to his former American countrymen, if he would try to talk to the Italians into anti-Semitism and back into fascism, as he does to the American shortwave listeners day after day, the mafia, the Italian underground movement, would get him on the short order, and some beautiful morning on the Mediterranean he'd wake up to find himself as dead as a doornail. It is diseased minds like Ezra Pound's which, suffering from unquestioned paralysis of the brains, keep barking across the Atlantic at their henchmen in this country. For Satan's sake, stir up anti-Semitism if you can't do anything else. And it is social and mental down and outers in this country, people who never became true Americans because they never emaciated from the guttural traditions of Europe. For the riddance of which this country was created by the founding fathers, who glue their ears to the shortwave sets to drink in the damnable portion of Ezra Pound's in Rome and Berlin. From them, from Rome again, they get such slanderous gags as Roosevelt is looking for a name, and for this war, he doesn't know that it has already been named the War of Mankind Against Judaism. Really. From them, they get the idea that all treacherous play with the word Christianity, which from Berlin this time is put on to make the Christian hate the Hebrew, so that by way of pogroms, our production lines come to a standstill and Hitler can mow down the Russians at his own pleasure. Let us get this thing of anti-Semitism straight. I am neither a Hebrew nor a refugee. I am simply plainly fight enemy propaganda, and I have been hearing here at the Mutual KFEL listening post right under the continental divide of America this past week, more anti-Semitic statements by Berlin and Rome than at any other one time of this war on the short waves. I draw one conclusion from this. The Axis knows the people of these United States are very united. And the only desperate hope for the Axis propagandist is anti-Semitism. Therefore, they play it up to the blue sky of Colorado. But in doing so, they admit their dismal failure because they admit they can appeal only to Americans who are not Americans and who are, in their worst sense of the word, for real Americans, the smudged in the gutter minds of Europe. But in doing so, they admit their dismal failure because they admit that they can appeal only to Americans who are not Americans and who are, in the worst sense of the word, for real Americans, the smuggled in gutter minds of Europe. And that is my analysis of propaganda for the present. The shortwave stations to which I have referenced were all of Berlin and all of the Rome stations. And now, from the rooftop of America, from this beautiful Tahosa Valley at the foot of Long's Peak, I wish you a pleasant good night. That was April 10th, 1942.